Because we just hear about critical race theory in the news, and somebody does not like it, and somebody's banning it, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people really understand what critical race theory is. So, if you could give a sort of definition of what it is and why are so many people threatened by it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's especially the case in Texas, where
Hmm.
I'm currently living and teaching at a public university. And the most recent backlash really started in 2020, but there's always been
Right.
resistance to critical race theory because what it is at its core is it's a critique from legal
Mm.
studies in particular that really is kind of a organic offshoot of the civil rights movement type of work. But by the 70s, a lot of these legal scholars were asking questions about American liberal ideologies and trying to think,
Hmm.
well, do they really work out the way that the founding fathers envisioned them? So things like freedom, things like
Mm.
equality, things like equal opportunity, choice, individualism, those sorts of good ideas, right, that are liberal.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so what these early legal scholars who became critical race theorists about 20 years later were starting to say is that, well, this doesn't always work out, especially through legal structures or institutional structures, for everyone the same. And we think race should be a central frame of how we look at these good ideas that don't apply the same for everyone across the
Right.
lines of race. And one of the ways that they decided to kind of do that, especially because these were people in law schools, was through storytelling, through having students
Mm.
do, acting out scenes of certain lawsuits or law cases, just putting into a more narrative form things that might be harder to read and access, especially at these
Mm.
elite law schools where this was starting, like Harvard and Berkeley and Yale. So, in a nutshell, that's that's what it is. It's a critique of liberalism at its core. And that is
Right.
threatening because that is what this country, whether it's not a partisan thing, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're Republican, all of us are supposed to buy into those ideas. And if
Right.
someone's over here saying, it doesn't really work out that way, and here's why, and here's who, yeah, that's very threatening. Nobody wants to think that we're not the best here in the United States and that we don't have the best ideas, and that they don't work out perfectly for everyone who's
Right.
here to do the American dream, right?
Right. Right. But that's the thing. We hear it as a historical narrative, something that we're not used to, or that isn't in the history books, and it has a lot of people riled up. So, as what you're saying is that it's more of a critique of liberal ideologies. So, what's all the fuss about?
Um, so again, kind of taking it to the most contemporary attack, but again, it has this long-standing attack. Um, So originally, the people
Hmm.
pushing against it were, liberal institutions and liberal media like the Washington Post, New York Times,
Right.
administrators at universities, because of this idea that no, just because you are left leaning, that doesn't mean there's not work to do, right? And so
Right.
there can always be improvements in terms of who gets hired,
Right.
how people are treated once they're there, all those sorts of things that institutions that are envision themselves as very democratic and left leaning don't want to hear, right?
Right.
And so that was the more historic, but the one now really came about and was instituted in a broader way in 2020 because that was the year that two things happened. Well, more than
Mm.
that. One, we were in
Right.
COVID, right? And so that was, but
Right.
also the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota
Mhm.
that prompted then the Black Lives Matter summer, really, that was
Right.
international. And the
Mm.
pendulum swing of that sort of activism, especially the solidarity that we saw the world over, similar
Right.
to what we're seeing with Palestine right now and some of that
Mm.
solidarity, there's always a backlash, right? There's a rhetorical backswing from the other side, the right in this case, to say that to demonize it, right? To make it scary or bad or
Right.
not good. And so some of the more conservative think tanks at that time, like the Heritage Foundation here in the US, pretty much deployed their spokesperson, Christopher Rufo, who's a
Mhm.
journalist, but also he calls himself a brawler of sorts, to news media like Tucker Carlson. And so that's
Mm.
exactly what happened. Rufo appeared on September 1st, 2020, on Tucker Carlson Live and just sounded the alarm on this horrific
Mm.
occult, he called it, ideology,
Right. Right.
that he was conflating with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, but
Inclusion.
labeling CRT, critical race theory. And in that
Right.
interview, which you can watch on YouTube, he says a lot of
Mhm.
really interesting and troubling things. He calls on President Trump to issue an executive order banning any of these DEI or CRT informed trainings from all
Right.
federal government entities. And that's really where it started because what think tanks do, right? What Heritage Foundation
Mm.
had prepared was kind of the template for what was the wording in this executive order that Trump ended up issuing by September 22nd, 2020. So this moved fast. And
Right.
then very soon after, within the next year, all these state governments, these state legislatures started drafting legislation that had the exact same boilerplate language from the Heritage
Right.
Foundation about what was wrong with CRT, how it's basically DEI, and they are different, and how it's, teaching white people to hate themselves, and how,
Mm.
um, one of the ones that sticks out to me the most, because this is one of the ones that happened in Texas, some of the legislation, that things like slavery and racism are not woven into the fabric of the founding of this country. They're just aberrations, they're outliers, right? They're things that happen. It's
Mm.
unfortunate, but it's not who we are, and so should not be taught
Right.
as
Right.
such in terms of history. So that's kind of the
Right.
the rundown of what brought us to this current moment.